Hello, welcome to Student Learning Commons. I am Mohsen, and in today's workshop, I will talk about the components of an argumentative essay and introduce a framework and some templates for writing argumentative essays. The framework is named They Say, I Say, My Critics Say, I Respond. You can apply this framework when you are writing the body paragraphs of an argumentative essay. The templates are useful because they help you to start writing down your ideas. But before we get started, I would like to do a land acknowledgement. The SLC acknowledges the Musqueam, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, Katsi, and Coquitlam nations and peoples on whose ancestral, unceded, and rightful lands the three SLC spaces are located. Traditionally, academic essays are made of three parts: introduction, body paragraphs, and conclusion. Introduction is where you introduce your topic and identify the specific focus of the essay and put your thesis statement at the end of it. Body paragraphs are where the framework They Say, I Say, My Critics Say, I Respond is applied. And conclusion is where you remind the reader about what you have discussed in your essay and answer the so what question. I will explain each of these sections in detail in the coming slides. Features of an effective argument. In an argumentative essay, you are required to investigate a topic by first collecting evidence and examining those evidence. Here, of course, you need to read extensively and critically. And then you need to take a position or make a claim on the issue or topic and support your position with research. So one of the essential features of an argumentative essay is that you have to take a position about the topic. Another significant feature of an effective argument is that you need to consider the counter-argument. Having a counter-argument is important in the sense that it makes you look more credible. Why? Because you show that you have extensive knowledge about the topic and you are not biased or uninformed. Introduction. Your essay should start with an introduction. Think of the format of the introduction paragraph as an inverted triangle. Start the introduction with a broad discussion of the topic and then gradually shift from general to specific and explain why the topic you are writing is important. Before ending the introduction with a thesis statement, you can describe in 1 or 2 sentences the organizational structure of the essay. For example, you might write, this paper begins by reviewing the literature on the history of racism in the US. It will then analyze the impact of racism on Black people. Keep in mind that describing the organizational structure of the essay, that's sometimes called purpose statement, is not the same as a thesis statement. Thesis statement is usually the last part of an introduction paragraph that comes after a purpose statement. So you describe the organizational structure of your essay, and then after that, you write down your thesis statement. But what is a thesis statement? A thesis statement expresses a position or a stance about the topic and indicates the supporting arguments or points. It tells the reader what to expect from the rest of the paper. So thesis statement shows your own stance or position about the topic. It's not an idea that you borrow from another educator or a scholar. So it's your own unique position or a stance about the topic. Do you need to have a thesis before you start writing? Well, not necessarily. Before you start writing your essay, you might have some claim or you may have some position about the topic. But as long as you start reading more and more and writing the first draft of your essay, you might see that you need to get back to your thesis and revise it. So thesis statement is not something that is fixed, and you don't need to have a thesis necessarily, a fixed thesis before starting writing your essay. It may change as you read more and as you write your first or second or like other drafts of your paper. A good thesis had a number of features. First, a good thesis statement responds to the assignment's question. So if the assignment requires you to consider one or more than one question in your essay, then the thesis statement could be your direct response to those questions. If the assignment doesn't include any question, then see if you can turn the assignment prompt to a question. For example, if your instructor wants you to discuss the consequences of X in your paper, now see if you can change the prompt to a question and, for example, what are the consequences of X? Then when you have a question in your mind, then your response to these questions could be your thesis statement. A good thesis statement must also be debatable. It's a claim that others might dispute. So your thesis statement is something that is argumentative. There are people who might disagree with you. So if you think that your thesis is something that everyone, including your friends and your peers, your instructor agrees with you, then maybe you need to revise it. On the other hand, if your thesis is something that your friends or your instructors might disagree with you, that actually could be a sign of a good thesis statement. A good thesis statement aims to convince readers of something and to change their minds about something. That's why we say a good thesis statement should be argumentative, because you want to change the minds of some people. And finally, a good thesis statement is narrow. So avoid writing a thesis that is too general and not specific enough to address the topic. Now, let's look at two examples. Example number one. If, for example, at the end of the introduction of my essay, I write a thesis statement like this. In this paper, I argue that cigarette smoking is injurious to health. So is it a good thesis statement? Well, maybe not, because I think almost everyone would agree that cigarette smoking is injurious to health. So this thesis statement is not argumentative. It's not something that is debatable and wants to convince some other people. On the other hand, if I write in this paper, I argue that the government of BC should double taxes on cigarettes because X and Y, then this could be a good thesis statement because there are some people who might disagree with me. For example, some people may say that we are already paying a lot of taxes, so why the government should double taxes on cigarettes? So these people might have their own argument, might have their own reasons for disagreeing with me. Then my job in my thesis would be to write an argument to show that my position is valid, to show that, well, why government of BC should double taxes on cigarettes. A thesis statement should include the reason. This is actually an important feature of a good thesis statement. An effective thesis is usually made of two parts: claim plus reasons, and the conjunction word because could be used to connect the claim to the reason. So a thesis is made of two parts. Claim is what you want to, it's your position, your stance about the topic. And then to support your position, you need to have some reasons. So depending on the length of your essay, you might have one reason, two reasons, three, or more than one, so that these reasons support your claim. And in your thesis statement, you can use the word, the conjunction word because to connect the claim to the reason. An effective thesis statement also sometimes refer to the opposing argument. So that's why I said earlier that a thesis statement, when it is argumentative, there are some people who disagree with you. Then in these example, so you can start your thesis statement with the word although, and then you write down what people who might disagree with you. And then in the next part, although that X is the case, and then your own claim and the reasons for supporting your claim. Common strategies for writing a thesis statement. When writing a thesis statement, you can begin it with presenting your argument or your position explicitly or implicitly. When you are presenting your argument explicitly, you can start your thesis statement with a phrase like, I will argue, or it will be argued that, and then the claim, the word because, and then after that, the reasons. Or although, even though, these essay argues that I will argue that, and then the claim, the word because, and then the reason. You can also present your argument implicitly. So in this case, you don't need to say, I argue, or these essay argues. So you just write down your thesis statement without using these phrases. So here are some templates that might help you write an effective thesis statement. You can use these templates to start writing your thesis. In this paper, comma, I argue that because. In the pages that follow, I will argue that because. Or this paper can test a claim that, this paper argues that, or the central thesis of this paper is. So you can use these templates to start writing your thesis statement. Check if you have a thesis. There are a number of tests, maybe, call them tests, that you can use to check if your essay had a thesis statement. First one, did I answer the question? So if your assignment, if your instructor wants you to respond to a question in your essay, then your thesis is the response, direct response to that question. So make sure that you respond to the question directly at the end of your introduction so that your essay then had a thesis statement. Did I take a position about the topic? Is my position debatable? Or are there people who might disagree with me? If yes, then your thesis is a good one. Ask someone to read the introduction paragraph and tell you what you will discuss or argue in the paper. So if you ask your friend to read the introduction paragraph, are they able to tell you what you are going to discuss in your paper? If yes, then you possibly have a thesis statement. But if no, they don't know and are confused with what your position about the topic is, then maybe you need to revise your thesis statement. Body paragraph, they say. So after the introduction paragraph, the body paragraphs start. As I said earlier, the body paragraph is where you can apply the they say, I say, my critics say, I respond framework. The body of an essay usually begins by providing a background of the topic or a summary of the resources that you have reviewed. This is sometimes called a literature review. So in this section, you bring other people's views into the paper. You want to show what other scholars, other educators are saying about the topic. And that's why we call this position they say. So you use techniques like paraphrasing, summarizing, or direct quotation to refer to what other researchers are saying about the topic. Here you can see some templates that you can use again when you are writing the they say part of your essay. A number of sociologists have recently suggested that, or today several studies have found, or they have shown that, or have investigated that, or prior studies have examined the association between X and Y. I say, after finishing the background section, you need to now include your own position on the topic. So the I say part. In this part, now you actually develop your thesis statement. You elaborate on the reasons that support your claim and provide evidence for the claim. This part is the most important section of an argumentative essay. In this section, you want to tell your reader if, for instance, maybe you agree or you disagree, or even both agree and disagree with the scholars. You have reviewed their argument in previous section and why you agree or disagree with them. Here you have to provide, of course, enough evidence to support your claim and to make the claim valid, and also explain the evidence adequately. You can use one of the following templates to bring your voice in. If you want to agree, for example, with some scholars, with their position, with their argument, or with some theories, you can say, I agree that, or support the view that, I concur with the view that. On the other hand, if you want to disagree with, again, scholars and educators or theories, you can start this section with phrases like, I disagree with the view that, or I challenge, I contest the view that, or I oppose, I'm opposed to, or I disagree with Anderson's, for example, 2008 view that because recent research has shown that, blah, blah. You can agree and disagree simultaneously. So here you can say, for example, although I agree with Brown 2016 up to a point, I cannot accept his overriding assumption that, or although I disagree with much that Anderson 2015 says, I fully endorse his conclusion that. So again, these are good templates that help you start writing the I say section of your essay and bring in your own position and your own voice into the paper. So when you are writing again this part, you need evidence. When you are making claim, when you agree with someone or disagree with someone, you need evidence to support your own position. Again, evidence could be quotations, could be paraphrases, summaries, or even anecdotes from your own lived experiences. Keep in mind that the evidence that you provide needs to be adequately explained. You need to develop your evidence so that when the reader read your evidence, they are convinced by the claim that you are making. Counterclaim, my critics say. This is the third part. So in a good argumentative essay, in addition to expressing your position and argument, you should also consider possible opposing views to your argument. Refer to what your opponents say. That's why we call it my critics say, and why they may disagree with your argument, including the idea of those who may disagree with you makes up the counter argument section of your paper. You can refer to actual people, including other research scholars who may disagree with you, or try and imagine what those who disagree with you might say. So a counter argument is a claim that challenges or disagrees with the thesis or the claim that you have initially made. Including a counterclaim, again, as I said earlier, makes you look more credible. And if you include several counterclaims, of course, it depends on the length of your essay. If your essay is, if you have enough space, then including several counterclaims show that you have investigated the topic extensively. And it shows that you have enough knowledge about the topic and you are not biased towards it. So you have to provide evidence for the counterclaim and tell your reader what the opposing side of the argument is, or actually what your opponents say and why. Counterclaim section in a, let's say, 5 to 7 page essay is about a paragraph or two. And here are some templates again that may help you in writing the counterclaim section. Opponents of my argument may call into the question and then write down your argument and would argue that And then now here you write down what they would argue. Sociocultural theories might object here that. So explain why sociocultural theories might disagree with you, what they say and why they disagree with you. Some people, however, might argue that my interpretation overlooks. Then you write down why and how. So if you don't know a real, let's say, a scholar or a real theory that might be used as a counter argument, then you can imagine one. Then you can use a template like, one may offer a contrasting perspective and state that, or it may, or it might, or it could be argued that. The last section is rebuttal or I respond. So after explaining what your opponents say, now you have to refute their argument. This is sometimes called the rebuttal. So rebuttal refers to evidence that challenges or disagrees with the counterclaim. You can respond to the counterclaim in one of the two ways. You can either refute the counterclaim and show why it is mistaken. Here you want to say your opponents failed to provide enough evidence to support their argument, or maybe their evidence lacks credibility or is flawed. The second way is that you want to maybe show that the counterclaim is only valid in certain situations. Here you may argue that your opponent's argument is valid, but not persuasive enough to be used in your study, or that their argument could be valid in a different context. For example, if a research has been conducted somewhere else in the world and the researchers are claiming something about their topic that opposes your argument, then you can say their argument is valid, but maybe not in the context that you are doing your research, the context that you are investigating the topic. You can refute the, so you can refute the counterclaim and show why it is mistaken. So here are some templates that might help you. So you can say this argument fails to find or maybe to show or to demonstrate any benefits in, or this argument overlooks recent research which indicates that, or the flawed logic here is, or the claim rests on a questionable assumption that. So as you see in this template, the focus is on rejecting the counterclaim. But when you want to show that the counterclaim is valid, but in a certain situation, then you can use one of these templates. This argument, which refers to the counter argument, whatever it is useful in the sense that, however, Vygotsky's theory of social constructivism is extremely useful because it shed light on different problems of X and Y. However, I argue that. So after referring to the counter argument, now you reject the counter argument and say that, yeah, the counter argument is valid, but not in this situation. Okay, finally, conclusion. The last part of the essay is the conclusion. Think of the concluding paragraph of your essay like a triangle. In your conclusion, you summarize and synthesize the focus and main arguments of your essay. You provide a final answer to your question and provide a sense of why the topic that you have investigated is significant. So in your conclusion, you summarize the focus and main arguments of your essay. You provide a final answer to your question and provide a sense of why the topic that you have investigated is significant. Also keep in mind that a conclusion is not a place for new information. Here are the sources that I cited and consulted for this workshop. Okay, thank you for watching this workshop. If you have any questions or if you need help with your assignments, please visit us at learningcommons.sfu.ca for free one-on-one consultation. We also have workshops and online resources that you can use. Thank you very much and good luck with your assignment.